Put your hand in the hand of the man who steals the water. I put your hand in the hand of the man who calms the sea. And if you look at yourself, then you just might see others differently. I put my hand in the hand of the man from Galilee. Well, every time I hear that holy scripture, I tremble. When a carpenter turns tables in the temple. All right, we're in chapter 3, the left hand. Just like we talked about the right hand had some duties to take care of. The left hand also has some of its own. Usually it's going to be either moving like this and playing melodies, or it's going to be holding still while you're strumming. And while it's holding still, there's a couple little things you can do to add a little, spice and flavor. So let me start with a few guidelines for the left hand that I tend to follow. These are more along the kind of basic rules, but they should be mentioned in case you haven't heard them before. When you're playing melodies, try to find a position on the neck where your hand is not moving back and forth a lot, because you can take something that would sound fluid and sound smooth, and it kind of gets choppy and awkward if you're moving around a lot. So, for example, if I'm playing Havana, let's say, and I go, I gotta remember how it goes. Yeah. So if I was playing Havana like this, and I'm just moving the same finger around, and it doesn't have the same quality as finding a spot where I can play all of that in the same area. So you see what I mean, and in the next couple pages here, you're going to see a couple exercises that are going to train your ability to use those fingers in one spot. Scales are also the main training exercise for playing melodies. No, scales do not exist because your teacher was some kind of sadist that wanted to just torture you day in and day out by making you do all of these worthless exercises. They are very, very important. Not only just for drilling to make sure you can execute, but most of the melodies and things that you hear, especially if we're talking about like typical pop music, and even back to, 90% of gold standard classical music is going to be a variation on a scale, or some kind of passage is going to, be the same kind of scalar motion, at least for a couple notes that a scale has. So very important that you can, really work your way around that. A lot of times if you're just trying to learn a melody or work your way through a passage of music, you're going to intuitively understand it because you're so used to where those notes are. So for example, kind of like that. You just kind of, after you do them enough times, you're just sort of going to know where they belong, where those notes are, even if you've never actually read it or learned it before. Now let's talk about the chords. Most of what your left hand will be doing is accompanying you or a person standing next to you, and singing if you're the one not doing it, or playing their instrument. And below are the techniques that I often pull out when adding a little flair to the chords. And later on in the advanced arranging chapter, you'll hear how each of these techniques can be employed to enhance a new section of a song's form. So onto our left hand techniques now. I have 6 examples here of left hand activity that can be employed at various spots in a typical ukulele song. These, of course, are not an exhaustive list, just like we talked about in the last chapter, but they're the ones I most often use. And as you move through a piece of music, you're going to want to switch things up a little bit and make things more interesting for yourself and for the listener. We'll talk a little bit later on how to do that, but for now, focus on developing these different techniques and plan to have a variety in your back pocket. So the first one is one you saw just a moment ago, or in the previous video, called the hammer. And the hammer is by far the one I use the most. It adds so much more melodic and rhythmic spice to your strum and your background accompaniment. So below is a typical strum that I play in several of my tunes, and listen to the difference in these examples. I'll leave you with 3 options. The first one is just a basic strum 4 on the floor, not employing any techniques. And then the second one is an example of medium complexity strumming pattern. And the third one is the one that involves the hammer, I should say the second one is the one that has the gold standard strum. So we've taken the 4 on the floor, made it a little more complex, and then finally I'll show you what that sounds like when you put the hammer in there. So here's your basic strum. Okay, same exact chords, gold standard strumming pattern. Adding the accent. Sounds nice, but now I'm going to add a hammer. I'm actually going to put 2 of them in there where you're going to hear me play the first string, and I'm going to throw down 2 hammers. Hammer is when you play a note and then a second finger, or in this case the open string, and you add a finger which makes a new note come out. So here's the same strum now with the hammers included. Sorry, I put a snare in there and I shouldn't have. This is where it was, time-wise. I think you would agree that adds a heck of a lot more to it. So after this, I put a little quick exercise on here. There's tons of exercises you can find online. You don't have to use mine, but I just use this as an example of what you can expect when you're practicing. It's good to practice just playing both from an open string to a hammer or starting on a fret and then adding a new fret. Do it on all the strings, different fingers, right? From 3 to 4, 1 to 2, 0 to 1, whatever, right? Just get really used to playing a note and then throwing down another finger. And you really got to throw it down kind of quick and squeeze it, or else you're going to get kind of a wimpy sound, which you don't want. Make sure that second note sings. And it might not look like it from what you see, but I'm really kind of squeezing the life out of that when I get there. Okay, next exercise is the pull off. I'm sure this technique comes with many names. I don't know what it's officially called. I just always called it the pull off. I think I've heard a bunch of other people call it the pull off, but I'm not positive of that. And this technique basically means that you're pulling your finger off of the note, either to a different finger that's going to play a second note, or just pulling it off to an open string. And below is an excerpt of one of my own tunes called Deal with the Devil that you'll hear later. And listen to the difference in these examples. The first one is an example of the melody where I don't do the pull-off technique or the hammer-on, and the second one has the pull-off technique in it. And you'll notice a difference in the smoothness in the second example that the first example doesn't have. And the advantages of the pull-off technique for me mainly is the elimination of the re-articulated note, the boom boom that you're going to hear. And the pull-off, as well as the hammer-on, gives the ukulele that singing effect. So here's that first example. Okay, so you hear all that dun 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 dun. Okay, here's the same excerpt, but now I'm going to put the pull off and the hammers in there. Sounds a little bit more like it's singing. Or do 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 do. Okay, so here's an example of a pull-off technique that you can try. It's the same idea. You just start with, on the second fret and then pull it off. Or you can do it from a different finger. On all the different strings and different combinations and different fingers and such. Okay, the next technique that I use in the left hand is the trill. And this one mimics the pull-off, but instead of playing the bottom note once, your finger hammers and then pulls it off right after. Either in a fluttering action, where you do it several times, like this, or you might just do it one time. But you're going to play the note, hammer it down first, and then pull it off right after. Or you can do several times. This is one of those techniques where you don't want to get too crazy with the cheese whiz. You don't want to be doing trills like 8 times in a 4-measure section or something, because then it gets kind of annoying. Unless it's a very specific effect you're going for, you want to just do it sparingly. So below is an excerpt. Below that you're going to see is an excerpt from the same tune we just examined with the pull-off technique, and the trill happens in the 4th complete measure. I should say that sometimes when you're doing a trill, you'll have a little courtesy symbol on top with a flat or a natural or a sharp, which for those who know, the standard notation, you'll know how many frets up higher you should be trilling for. So sometimes you're just going to trill, 1 fret higher like that. Sometimes you need to do 2 higher and maybe even 3. So I won't go into all the crazy details, but basically, there's a word we use in music called diatonic, which means that you are obeying the key. So if you are playing in D minor, for example, and I'm going to do a trill right here. If I'm playing in D minor and I go to A, so it belongs 1 fret higher, but if I'm playing in D major, so if I'm going, it sounds proper to go 2 frets higher. So these are things you'll just have to be aware of or study further into on your own. Okay, so we have same passage. Now I'm going to add the trill. So we have right there at the end. All right, so once again. With a little hammer action at the end of that. Okay, and then below that is another trill exercise if you want to try it out. So you have 1 or 0 to 1 and then back open. And I show you in the music there, if you want to see in standard notation, you might see it as them literally writing out the notes, and sometimes you'll just see the G with a trill symbol on top of it, and they mean the same thing. So that was the first one I played, and here's the next note you see. Same thing. Then you go on to 0 2 0, and then same thing, and then 0 3 0. Sorry, and then 0 4 0, and then you try the same thing on the next string. Experiment with your fingers being in different positions, in different places on the instrument, and that's the trill. Next one is sliding. Sliding is another technique that needs to be used tastefully. Too much sliding around the neck, again, will annoy your audience. And nevertheless, there are specific times that I use this because it can add remarkable flair. Every time I say that, I think of Office Space and 30 pieces of flair or whatever. This technique is basically what it sounds like. You're sliding up and down the neck. Sliding up the neck this way will usually work quite well. Sliding down, you lose a lot of the effect because of the nature of the instrument. So I only do sliding down rarely. I usually will slide up. And below here you can see some generic exercises as well. The first exercise experiments with sliding between different distances, upward and downward. And it's important to practice sliding from one note to the next using the same finger, and also practicing sliding from one note to the next and switching to a different finger. So we have 2 different exercises here for you to see, and after this I'll do another excerpt from Deal with the Devil that utilizes the slide. So the first exercise you see here is me sliding using the same finger, or 2 to 4, 2 to 5, and then 2 to 6, and then same thing on a different string, and so on. Sliding down, 5 to 4, 5 to 3, 5 to 2, and then sometimes you're going to be on like your middle finger and you need to get to your first finger. So I'm going to go from like 2 to 7 and switch to a different finger. This takes a little work. Something that you're going to want to little by little become more and more familiar with. And I mentioned earlier that I'll just show it to you again. I did the slide earlier on Deal with the Devil, but I'll do it again here. That little bang, that was the slide right there, right before the trill. There's another one. I slid down to the open string. All right, and then I do another one also in the same song that you'll see. It says slide trainer example number 2, where I'm playing these 2 notes. That's one that I like to do a lot, especially on the A chord. And then if you play the whole chord, you can do it that way too, where you're sliding on 2 different strings and playing the rest of the chord again. So those are all cool examples. Oh, here we are. So Deal with the Devil, this is the next exercise where I do that slide going up. So I'll go ahead and sing along with it. Me that ukulele, and it played so pure and true. Cool. And now let's discuss one of the less common techniques, but still just as valuable, and that's tapping. Most guitarists know about tapping already, but in case you don't, it's pretty much a very advanced hammer on and pull off technique. Sometimes between both hands, sometimes with just one hand. I'll go ahead and do it with both hands here to show you what it looks like. And the idea behind tapping is that the note doesn't become activated by plucking the string, it becomes activated by punching down on it pretty much. And very similar to the hammer-on. And after you tap the string, by pulling your hand off, that's what makes the sound, and it vibrates the string for the next tap or for the next hammer down. It is important to note that tapping does not always need to entail some kind of crazy Van Halen, Stanley Gordon epic showboating. I remember how I spoke earlier about how ukulele just makes everything cooler. Well, you can finish off some arrangements with just a simple tap. In fact, Deal with the Devil does finish that way, where I'm playing. And I just throw that little tap right there. So just sometimes a single note is like a perfect kiss at the end of the whole experience. And that small detail will take you worlds farther than just ending with a strum, which is what a lot of people would do. So here's another example here of kind of what you can do with tapping. I'll go slow motion first. So, and if you go up to speed, which I'm not an expert at this at all, but I'm going to change the exercise just a little bit to make it last a little longer. So there you go, there's tapping. And just to do another example or excerpt here from Deal with the Devil. Devil tried to take my soul from me. Okay, so now we have harmonics. Harmonics are always cool. Again, watch any tutorial online to get more information about it, but harmonics are a very delicate technique, and the key behind it is to place your finger on the string with the smallest amount of pressure in a very specific spot. And as you press very gently on the string, you're going to release your left finger off it while you pluck, and it makes a boom, nice little ping sound on it, which I always enjoy. And below is a basic trainer for harmonics. I've seen different ways to notate this, and I'm not really sure which is the right way, but usually I see a tiny little circle on top of the note, which is what I've always known to be harmonics. So if you look at this exercise here, you play the open G, and then you go up to fret number 12, just barely touch it, and you get that nice little ping. Same thing on the next string. And I love harmonics. Again, like all the other techniques, you don't want to overdo it, but I do it a lot because they sound really nice. So the last little exercise I have here is just a little ditty I put together. I just call it the chef salad because I kind of throw everything in, even the kitchen sink. And it's a nice little technique training etude that you can play so you can experiment with all of these challenges. Now, not all of these techniques are used on the ukulele, of course. These are just the ones that I use most often. Later in the advanced arranging chapter, we'll talk more about how to incorporate them. And finally, my general thoughts on phrasing. This is a more advanced concept that you're going to start walking into, or you're going to start, it's going to be more, I guess I should say, it's going to be placed in your lap, whether you like it or not, in the future. And I would succinctly wrap that up as phrasing should sound like the instrument is singing, or if you're phrasing well, your instrument will sound like it's singing. And yes, just like most of the topics in music performance, phrasing is another one that could go on into many different elements and cover a lot of detail. But in short, an instrument should sound the same way it would if it had the mechanism with the complexity of the human voice, the human mouth. Even one that looks complex, like a saxophone with all of its fancy buttons and stuff and twists and turns, it essentially is a vibrating reed with open and closed holes. A guitar or a ukulele is pretty much the same idea. It's just a couple strings with frets that cut off the length of the string. And I'm not saying these things to minimize the importance of the instruments. I'm just saying that, with thousands of more years of instrumental evolution and innovation, we will never come close to the complexity and sophistication of our God-given human voice. But we should try to get as close to it as we can. That's kind of like the gold standard. Now that we've concluded the chapters on left-hand and right-hand techniques, let's take a look at how these can be incorporated into an arrangement of your own. All of these techniques are compiled into something I call the change-up list. And the change-up list is a small bank of little tips and techniques that you can introduce into your arrangement, as little tasteful twists and turns, so that each section of your song sounds unique, even if only very subtle. It's just kind of like the change-up list is sort of the running program in the back of my mind as I'm playing. I just kind of think, okay, I got something important coming up in about 5 seconds. What do I want to draw on? What do I want to pull out? So review, right hand, you got your 4-on-the-floor strum, you got your gold standard strum with the little pop snare effect. You have your claw, your arpeggiated banjo-like, finger roll style. I also I should say you have your fast swing and your 6-tuplet fast swing and all those little Latin, those little Latin rhythms that we talked about. And even sometimes if I'm playing a chord and I'm going to a different chord, I'll do a little just a quick little rhythmic filler, just real quick, throw it in there just to make it kind of cool. Left hand, you have your hammer-ons, your pull-offs, your trills, slides, tapping, harmonics, and then something that I didn't talk about, but it's something you should look into, is something called chord substitutions or passing chords. So if you're playing a chord and you're going up to a new chord, try to do something sometimes that just passes through with different chords. So for example, if I'm doing a B flat and I know I'm going to be going to a C, you just move the chord up until you get to C is a good example, or just changing the chord entirely. So you have, if you're playing C and you're supposed to be going to G, but you can play an E minor 6 or an E6. No, An E, you're playing a C and you're going to a G6. Gives it a little bit of a different change. So that's G. Very subtle, but the effect is important sometimes. It's really nice if you put it in just in the right spot. So learning all of the appropriate chord substitutions makes a big difference. Okay, and then I put a little note on here for the left hand as another option is to harmonize the melody, which is a lot of places just call it finger style. So if you know you're going to be playing a melody, trying to incorporate the chord while you're doing it is also a really good trick to pull out of your pocket. So we are done with chapter 3. We are going on to chapter 4, basic arranging. See you there. But promise ye you'll worship me, and all that it will cost is just your soul. He handed me that ukulele, and it played so pure and true, and it made my voice sing sweetly. Never thought